Hollywood has always thrived on mystery, glamour, and power, but every so often a story surfaces that shakes the foundations of its glittering facade. Today we dive into one of those stories, a revelation so explosive that it forces fans, insiders, and even skeptics to look at their favorite stars in an entirely new light. New evidence tied to Justin Baldoni has come to the surface, exposing a shocking moment when he and others realized that Blake Lively held them metaphorically hostage. The term hostage here does not refer to physical confinement, but to the invisible power plays the manipulation and the subtle control that turned creative partnerships into cages of fear and silence for years. Blake Lively has cultivated the perfect image of elegance, charm, and influence, an untouchable star whose reputation shined brighter than most. Yet behind that curated public persona, the evidence suggests there was another reality, a hidden story of control that shaped careers, silenced dissent, and left those around her questioning their freedom and agency. The most shocking part is that many of those affected did not see it at first. They believed they were collaborators, partners, even friends, until the moment of realization hit them with devastating clarity. Suddenly, they saw the patterns, the strategic moves, the quiet but firm grip that made it impossible to speak out without risking everything. And it was in that moment, Baldoni and his allies understood they were not free players, but hostages in a carefully controlled game. This revelation is not just about one confrontation, it is about the system that allowed silence to thrive. And it is about the courage it takes to finally break that silence and reveal the truth. The story begins with an unexpected revelation that has sent shockwaves through Hollywood, as new evidence tied to Justin Baldoni has surfaced, exposing a shocking moment where many claim they realized Blake Lively allegedly held them metaphorically hostage in both influence and control. The details are complex, the emotions are raw, and the timing could not be more dramatic for an industry already reeling from scandals, lawsuits, and the hidden power struggles that shape careers, reputations, and legacies. Justin Baldoni has long been seen as a figure who values authenticity, integrity, and artistic vision. Yet his journey became entangled in ways few could have predicted, with Blake Lively, whose carefully crafted public image of elegance, charm, and influence now stands under a microscope where whispers and leaked fragments tell a different story. The word hostage here is not about physical confinement, but about psychological, emotional, and professional control, a power dynamic that allegedly created an atmosphere where others felt trapped, compelled to follow a narrative they did not fully agree with, or silenced when they attempted to push back. This new evidence paints a chilling picture of what really unfolded behind the polished Hollywood smiles and red carpet appearances. According to documents, testimonies, and insider accounts, the moment of realization came during a pivotal project when conversations behind closed doors began to unravel carefully concealed truths. Sources describe a shocking confrontation that exposed how much sway Blake held over decisions, careers, and even the flow of information. People who once thought they were collaborating on equal footing began to see patterns of manipulation layered in subtle gestures, strategic leaks, and carefully timed moves. The narrative shifted dramatically when emails and private notes emerged, showing how meetings were orchestrated in ways that always seemed to tilt in her favor. The evidence suggests that Blake did not simply participate in projects, but positioned herself in ways that allowed her to shape outcomes, protect her image, and control others' paths at moments when her influence seemed threatened. Reports highlight one particular meeting, where Baldoni and his close collaborators first realized the weight of her control. Insiders recall a tense atmosphere as discussions turned heated and projects faced derailment unless certain conditions were met. What struck many most was not the content of the demands, but the realization that this was a pattern repeated quietly in different rooms across Hollywood. Many left that meeting with a sense of dread, realizing that they were not free participants but rather players in a larger game where the rules were always bent to fit one person's narrative. The evidence further shows how this controlling pattern left long-lasting impacts on careers, personal relationships, and public perceptions. People who dared to voice dissent reportedly found themselves isolated, labeled, or subtly pushed out of opportunities, while those who complied were rewarded with favorable press, glowing narratives, and access to exclusive circles. Justin Baldoni himself is said to have wrestled with this dilemma, torn between speaking out and maintaining professional ties. The shocking moment of realization marked a turning point for him and those around him, because it underscored that what they were dealing with was not just ordinary creative disagreements, but something deeper, systemic, and insidious. The documents emphasize that while outwardly, everything appeared glamorous, inside the environment was tense and suffocating, an invisible cage of expectations that many likened to being held hostage, not by chains, but by the weight of influence, manipulation, and the fear of retaliation. One insider described it vividly as a performance where everyone smiled in public, but behind the scenes they were walking on eggshells, hoping not to trigger repercussions from even the smallest perceived slight. In this context, the new evidence is more than just paperwork. It is a lens into a hidden culture that thrived on silence, complicity, and power imbalance. Critics argue that Hollywood has long had such dynamics, but what makes this moment different is that the details are being exposed with receipts, direct accounts, and courageous voices willing to break through the fear wall. For Baldoni, the shocking moment reportedly shifted his perspective and catalyzed a decision to gather proof to bring truth to light, to ensure that the pattern was no longer buried under polished interviews or magazine covers. His allies began to compile a timeline cross-referencing leaks, inconsistencies, and behind-the-scenes testimonies. The evidence is said to show not only the shocking moment of realization, but the broader implications of how careers were shaped and controlled by calculated influence tactics. In many ways, it echoes stories from other industries where whistleblowers step forward to reveal that what looked like collaborative environments were actually dominated by one person's need to control the narrative as Hollywood processes these revelations. The public reaction is one of both fascination and outrage. Fans who adored Blake Lively's polished persona are now questioning the layers of strategy behind it, while supporters of Baldoni commend his courage for standing firm in an environment where speaking out can often mean career suicide. Media outlets are already speculating that this evidence may reshape public opinion in ways no PR campaign can undo. The hostage metaphor has taken on new weight as commentators debate how much of Hollywood runs on invisible cages of influence and power. The shocking moment is not just about one confrontation, but about the broader realization that silence, compliance, and image management often come at the cost of truth, creativity, and genuine collaboration. For many, this evidence is a mirror forcing them to ask how many more stories remain buried. How many others have felt the invisible grip of control, but chose not to speak for fear of losing everything? Baldoni's decision to push forward may ignite others to step out of the shadows and share their own moments of realization. It is in this environment that the story continues to unfold, and it is clear that this is only the beginning of what promises to be a seismic shift in Hollywood narratives. As the layers of this shocking story continue to unfold, more details emerge from the evidence compiled around Justin Baldoni's realization, and the broader circle that began to see the patterns of Blake Lively's control. What becomes clear is that this was not an isolated event or a single misunderstanding. Rather, it was a calculated system designed to maintain dominance while ensuring that opposition never gained ground. Insiders describe how over time the realization deepened, like a slow awakening, each new discovery pointing to a bigger picture that had been hidden beneath charm, red carpet glamour, and perfectly curated media appearances. It was during a key stage of production on a major project that the tension boiled. Over documents and testimonies indicate that Lively's influence extended into casting decisions, script approvals, and even promotional strategies, leaving others wondering whether they were truly collaborators or merely participants in her carefully controlled narrative. One individual described the atmosphere as suffocating, noting that even minor suggestions had to align with her vision or risk being shut down. The evidence highlights how those around her were subtly conditioned to comply. Small rewards such as glowing mentions in interviews or access to industry events reinforced the behavior, while dissent often resulted in icy silence, exclusion, or whispered rumors that damaged reputations. Over time, the cumulative effect created what many now refer to as a hostage-like environment, not in physical terms, but in psychological and professional captivity, where freedom of expression was sacrificed for survival. What shocked Baldoni most was the moment he realized how many people were quietly enduring the same pattern. Each person thought they were alone in their discomfort, until conversations revealed that the stories matched almost perfectly. The same tactics, the same threats of exclusion, the same manipulation of narrative. This realization fueled his determination to document everything, to connect the dots, and to build a case that could no longer be ignored. Reports suggest that one of the most revealing pieces of evidence came from email chains that showed how discussions were carefully steered to ensure outcomes that aligned with Lively's preferences. Insiders note that the tone of these exchanges shifted dramatically whenever anyone pushed back. Suddenly, the atmosphere turned tense with subtle reminders of reputational risks or vague threats of projects being derailed. This reinforced the idea that control was not incidental but deliberate, a strategy designed to keep others compliant and prevent resistance from gaining traction. What makes this moment even more chilling is the psychological toll described by those who lived through it. Many spoke of constant anxiety, a sense of walking on eggshells, unsure of when they might trigger retaliation or fall out of favor. One source compared it to being in an invisible cage where the bars were made of fear, reputation, and influence rather than steel. These testimonies underscore the metaphor of being held hostage not by physical restraint, but by a system of manipulation that kept people in place against their will. The evidence also reveals how public perception was tightly managed by Lively, and her team media outlets were strategically fed narratives that painted her in the most favorable light, while others were silenced or redirected. Those who tried to speak out found themselves discredited, framed as bitter, or dismissed as irrelevant. One particularly telling document shows how a coordinated media strategy was deployed within hours of an internal dispute, ensuring that any hint of dissent was overshadowed by glowing headlines. This level of control convinced Baldoni and others that they were up against not just an individual, but an entire machinery designed to protect an image at all costs. The turning point came when a group of collaborators compared notes and realized that their individual experiences were part of a larger pattern. This was the shocking moment of clarity, that they had all been held in a kind of collective hostage situation, manipulated into silence and compliance by the fear of losing careers, credibility, and opportunities. The sense of betrayal was profound, especially for those who had once trusted Lively as a genuine partner and friend. As the story spread through quiet circles, more voices began to emerge, each with their own accounts of manipulation and fear. One insider described how they felt frozen in time, unable to move forward with their own creative projects, because every path seemed blocked unless it aligned with her narrative. Another shared that they had been subtly blacklisted after raising concerns, finding doors that were once open now firmly closed. Baldoni's growing awareness of these stories fueled his resolve to bring the truth to light, even though he knew the risks were enormous. In Hollywood, speaking against powerful figures often leads to exile. Yet for him, the choice became clear. Silence would only perpetuate the cycle. The evidence also points to moments when Lively allegedly leveraged personal relationships to maintain control, playing individuals against each other, to create divisions that ensured no united opposition could form, by isolating people and fostering mistrust. She kept them fragmented, a tactic described in the documents as one of the most effective forms of control. For many, the realization that they had been manipulated into turning on each other was the most painful part of the hostage dynamic. It revealed not only control, but betrayal at a deeply personal level. Critics of Baldoni argue that his decision to expose these truths may come across as opportunistic. Yet supporters insist that the timing reflects courage rather than convenience. They argue that it takes immense strength to speak out against entrenched power, especially when reputations, legacies, and careers hang in the balance. Media analysts suggest that this revelation will mark a turning point in how Hollywood narratives are crafted. The polished image carefully maintained for years is now colliding with a more complex and troubling reality, one that fans and industry insiders cannot ignore much longer. The metaphor of hostage resonates strongly because it speaks to the invisible pressures that shape not only Hollywood, but many industries, where influence can silence truth. Commentators note that what Baldoni and his collaborators experienced is a reflection of systemic issues that extend beyond one person to an entire culture of control, silence, and fear. Breaking this cycle requires voices willing to risk everything to bring hidden truths to the surface. As more evidence emerges, the picture becomes clearer. This was not about disagreements or creative differences, but about a structured system of control maintained through influence, fear, and manipulation. The shocking moment they all realized they were hostages is now a rallying point, a reminder that even in the most glamorous of industries, there are invisible chains that bind people to narratives they do not believe. For Baldoni and others, the decision to expose this truth is both personal and professional. It is about reclaiming freedom, breaking the invisible cage, and ensuring that future collaborators do not find themselves trapped in the same cycle. The road ahead is uncertain, but what is clear is that the silence has been broken, and once that happens, the truth cannot be buried again. The aftermath of that shocking realization spread quickly among the circles closest to Justin Baldoni and the collaborators who felt the same invisible weight of control. What started as quiet conversations soon grew into a network of whispered exchanges where people cautiously compared their experiences and recognized the consistency of the pattern. One person after another spoke of moments where they had been cornered into compliance, not because they believed in the direction they were pushed toward, but because they feared the consequences of resistance. It was in those hushed meetings and private phone calls that the collective understanding formed. They were not imagining the pressure. They were not overreacting. They were being held metaphorically hostage by the calculated influence of Blake Lively and the machinery surrounding her. This growing awareness only deepened the sense of betrayal for many who once saw her as a trusted figure. The discovery that charm and grace could be wielded as tools of control rather than genuine connection unsettled them in profound ways. The evidence gathered shows how emotional manipulation was layered into everyday interactions. Small comments crafted to undermine confidence, subtle praise used to secure loyalty, carefully timed gestures that shifted power dynamics in her favor. These were not accidents, but consistent tactics used to ensure that her influence remained unchallenged. Baldoni, who had always valued collaboration, began to see how those values were exploited against him and others. The very trust he extended became a lever for control. Insiders recall a meeting where he tried to introduce new creative ideas, only to find them quietly dismissed with a smile. That masked sharp resistance within days. A different version of the idea resurfaced, repackaged, and claimed as aligned with her vision. The message was clear. Only her narrative could stand at the forefront. This was the moment Baldoni realized that he was not a partner, but a pawn caught in a web of influence that disguised control as collaboration documents show that others faced similar situations, with some describing entire projects that shifted course simply because one person decided it should. Even when those changes clashed with artistic direction or practical realities, the evidence makes clear that this was not about collaboration, but about ensuring that no decision escaped her oversight. The sense of captivity grew stronger. As people began to connect the dots, the hostage metaphor echoed again and again in testimonies, not because they were physically restrained, but because they felt robbed of agency. Their voices muted their creativity, redirected their independence, slowly eroded by fear of retaliation. Reports describe a particularly chilling moment when one collaborator finally confronted Lively about the manipulation, only to be met with silence, followed by a swift unraveling of their career opportunities. Within weeks, they found themselves excluded from meetings, their names removed from credits, and their presence erased from discussions. The message sent to everyone else was unmistakable. Compliance was survival, resistance was erasure. Baldoni himself faced crossroads during this period, torn between the instinct to protect his career and the growing conviction that silence would only perpetuate the cycle. The evidence shows that he began documenting everything: emails, messages, conversations, notes, each piece forming a puzzle that revealed how deeply entrenched the control system had become. His allies encouraged him, reminding him that their shared experiences gave weight to the truth, and that breaking the silence was the only path to freedom. Yet the risks loomed large in an industry where reputation is currency. Exposing such patterns could mean isolation, blacklisting, or worse. Still, Baldoni pressed forward because he knew that the shocking moment of realization demanded more than quiet acknowledgement. It demanded action. The testimonies highlight how the psychological toll weighed heavily on those caught in this system. One source described the constant second-guessing, the feeling that every word, every gesture, was being monitored, evaluated, and potentially used against them. The pressure to maintain a facade of support in public, while privately drowning in frustration, created a dual existence, draining and exhausting in every way. People spoke of sleepless nights, endless rehearsing of conversations, and the gnawing fear that even unintentional missteps could trigger retaliation. This environment of fear reinforced the hostage dynamic, making escape feel impossible for many, until Baldoni began to connect the voices into a collective narrative. Media analysts suggest that the timing of these revelations could not be more significant. Hollywood is already grappling with broader conversations about accountability, transparency, and the abuse of influence. The Baldoni evidence fits directly into this moment, offering not only a personal story, but a case study of how systems of control operate under the surface. One commentator noted that the hostage metaphor resonates because it captures the invisible prison of fear and manipulation that defines so many hidden dynamics in Hollywood. The evidence also sheds light on how carefully curated media strategies supported this system. Whenever cracks appeared in the narrative, they were quickly patched over by positive headlines, flattering interviews, and staged public appearances. These distractions ensured that fans and outsiders remained focused on the polished image, while the struggles behind the scenes remained buried. One document details how within hours of a tense dispute, a glowing article appeared, celebrating Lively's supposed leadership and vision, effectively drowning out whispers of dissent. This coordination reinforced the idea that the control was not just personal, but systemic, supported by teams invested in protecting the image at all costs. As Baldoni and his allies pieced together these patterns, they began to see the larger implications. This was not just about one project or one confrontation, but about a model of influence that had shaped careers, silenced voices, and distorted narratives for years. The shocking moment of realization became a symbol of collective awakening, a point where people could no longer deny the invisible chains that bound them. The evidence is clear that many lived in silence for fear of losing everything. But once the truth began to surface, it spread rapidly, giving others courage to step forward. The hostage metaphor shifted from a private whisper to a public conversation, challenging Hollywood to confront the culture of control that had long thrived in its shadows for Baldoni. The journey became not only about exposing the truth, but about reclaiming agency, about ensuring that creativity, collaboration, and honesty could once again have space free from manipulation. He recognized that this was bigger than himself, that the evidence he gathered could empower others to break free from the invisible cages that defined their lives. The process was not easy, and the risks remained high, but the choice was no longer between safety and truth, it was between complicity and freedom. And for Baldoni, the path was clear. The story of Justin Baldoni and the shocking evidence that revealed the moment he and others realized they were being held metaphorically hostage by Blake Lively is not just another Hollywood scandal. It is a case study in how influence, control, and carefully crafted images can create invisible cages that trap even the most talented voices. The evidence paints a picture that goes beyond gossip. It reveals the emotional, psychological, and professional toll of living under the shadow of manipulation and fear. What began as quiet whispers grew into undeniable proof that the glamorous exterior of Hollywood often hides the darker realities within. For Baldoni, the choice to expose these truths was not simply about personal vindication, but about breaking a cycle that had silenced too many for too long. His courage to connect the dots to speak, despite the risks, and to stand firm against a system designed to protect powerful images at all costs, serves as a reminder that freedom comes when silence is broken. The metaphor of hostage resonates so deeply because it speaks to the universal struggle of reclaiming agency from those who use influence as chains. This conclusion is not the end, but the beginning of a larger conversation, one that challenges Hollywood to confront its hidden power structures and forces audiences to question the narratives they are fed. The shocking moment of realization will remain a turning point, not only for Baldoni, but for all who now see the invisible dynamics that have shaped careers and stories for years. As the truth continues to spread, it becomes harder to bury, harder to deny, and impossible to silence. This is the legacy of the evidence, a reminder that even in the brightest spotlight, shadows always remain until someone dares to reveal them.